Hey guys, tonight we're rewinding the sands of time to the banks of the Nile. You're not a tourist, though. You're a new recruit on a pharaoh's construction crew. Forget your comfy bed. We're trading it for reed mats and the promise of liquid gold. Beer. Don't worry, you won't actually haul stones tonight, but you might gain a deep appreciation for ancient OSHA standards, or lack thereof. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment too. Tell me your city and the time right now. I'm always curious where in the world sleep-deprived history lovers are tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You blink awake as the first hint of peach bleeds into the indigo sky. The air is cool, damp with Nile, mist clinging to your linen tunic. Around you, shapes stir, a cough, a grunt, the rustle of reeds. A horn blares, sharp and insistent. Time to move. Your back protests, muscles remembering yesterday's limestone blocks. But today isn't about hauling stones. Not yet. Today, you're assigned to the Per West Hut, the house of brewing. Relief washes over you, almost as sweet as the promise ahead. Hauling rocks under the merciless sun, that might break you. Brewing beer, that's practically a holiday, with a tasty bonus at the end. Your sandals slap against the packed earth path leading away from the sleeping workers' village. The scent changes. Damp earth, donkey dung, smoke from early cook fires, giving way to something richer, earthier, almost sweetly sour. It's the smell of yesterday's labor, transforming into today's reward. You pass the granaries, massive mud brick sentinels brimming with golden barley, the lifeblood of Egypt and the heart of your task. A stocky man with forearms like twisted rope and a bald head gleaming in the nascent light gestures impatiently. You, new one, name. His voice is a gravelly whisper, mindful of the still sleeping village. You mutter your name. Huh. Well, Nebbit, he says, using the generic beer goddess title for all brewers. Forget the stones today. Your pay isn't copper or grain today. It's Hinkit. He grins, revealing a missing tooth. Liquid bread, the real wage that built the pyramids. Keeps your belly full and your feet moving when RA tries to bake you alive. Beer wasn't just a drink. It was a core part of the Egyptian workers' daily ration, as essential as bread. It provided crucial calories, hydration, safer than Nile water, and vital nutrients like B vitamins from the fermented grain. Think of it as the world's first documented energy drink, with a slight buzz. You glance at a papyrus scrap pinned near a large clay vat. It's a worker's log, meticulously recording rations. Day 14, month of Ake. Gang enduring of Khufu. Beer, 10 jugs. Bread, 200 loaves. The scribe even noted a deduction for a broken tool, settled with an extra jug of beer. Turns out, beer was literally currency here. Forget Bitcoin. The original liquid asset was brewed barley. Why prioritize beer over water for massive workforces? Historians agree on nutrition and safety, but the scale? That's where the arguments bubble like fermentation. Some say the Nile water near settlements was often contaminated, making beer the safer bet. Others argue it was pure economics. Brewing used surplus grain efficiently. But a few fringe theorists whisper was the mild intoxication, around 3% alcohol, a deliberate management strategy, a gentle numbing of aches and grumbles under the pharaoh's watchful eye. We'll likely never know for sure, but stand near those vats later. You might just understand the appeal after a shift hauling limestone blocks. You follow the head brewer into the open-air brewery. Large clay vats, zeers, squat like sleeping giants. Baskets overflow with plump barley grains. The air thrums with quiet industry as others arrive. The head brewer scoops a handful of barley, letting the golden grains trickle through his fingers. This, he rasps, is the start, the seed of our sweat, the heart of our reward. Today we wake it up. He points to a vast, shallow stone basin filled with clear, cool Nile water. Get those baskets. We soak the future. You heft a basket, the rough weave biting into your shoulder. The grains cascade into the water with a soft, rushing sigh. They sink, swirling, drinking deep. You imagine them swelling, the potential for sustenance and slight inebriation locked within each tiny husk. The head brewer nods, satisfied. Good. Let's sleep in the water until R.A. climbs high. Then we make a dance. He winks. Your liquid paycheck is officially underway. You dip your hand in the cool water, stirring the submerged barley. It feels cool, heavy with promise. This isn't just brewing. It's coaxing life, sweetness, and survival from the humble grain. And you're getting paid in it. Not a bad deal for now. Section 2. The cool water, soaking the barley was a distant memory. R.A. now rides high in the sky, a blazing copper disc turning the brewery courtyard into an oven. Your tunic clings, damp with sweat and the lingering moisture from the basins. The head brewer, whose name you've learned is Kenny, meaning rower, though you doubt he's seen a boat in years, squats beside the first stone basin. He plunges his arm in, fishing out a handful of swollen barley grains. They glisten, fat and heavy, water streaming between his thick fingers. He squeezes one between thumb and forefinger. It yields easily, splitting to reveal a tiny, pale nub pushing forth from the heart of the grain. A satisfied grunt escapes him. See this? He rasps, holding the sprouting seed up. Life stirs. The hard sleep is broken. Now comes the dance, the gentle awakening. Kenny gestures to the damp, swollen grain. Out, he commands. Workers move swiftly, scooping the saturated barley from the water with wide, shallow baskets woven from reeds. The water sluices away, leaving the grains plump and glistening on the stone lip of the basin. It's your turn. You grab an empty basket, surprisingly heavy even when dry. Together, you help transfer the wet mass onto vast, clean reed mats spread across a shaded section of the packed earth floor. The grains form a thick, damp carpet. Kenny walks barefoot onto the mat, his calloused feet sinking slightly into the yielding mass. Come, he orders, not unkindly. Shoes off. Feet clean. This, he stamps gently, is where the magic really starts. We wake the sweetness. You hesitate for only a second before slipping off your worn leather sandals. The packed earth beneath the reed mat is cool, a relief after the hot stone. You step onto the bed of wet barley. The sensation is immediate and strange. Cool, slippery, yielding, yet oddly firm beneath the softness. Thousands of plump grains shift under your weight. Kenny demonstrates lifting one foot, then the other in a slow, rhythmic shuffle. Not stamping, dancing, he chuckles. Like this. Gentle. We turn the bed. We give it air. We keep it damp, not drowned. The little life inside needs to breathe, to stretch, to grow. He moves with surprising grace for such a stocky man, a slow, shuffling waltz across the grain. Malting is the crucial process where soaked barley grains are allowed to germinate. This activates enzymes within the grain that convert its stored starches into simpler sugars, mainly maltose, which yeast can later ferment into alcohol. The Egyptians, without knowing the biochemistry, mastered the practical art of controlled germination. As you begin your own tentative shuffle alongside Kenny and the others, another brewer sprinkles the barley bed with handfuls of fresh water from a clay jar. Kenny explains, too dry, the little root stops. Too wet, it drowns. Feel it with your feet. Know it. It's an intimate knowledge passed down, learned by texture and temperature underfoot. And yes, sometimes feet were used. While sieves and rakes existed, the gentle foot-turning method ensured even aeration without crushing the delicate sprouts. A surprisingly effective low-tech solution. Imagine the job description: malting technician. Must have clean feet and a good sense of rhythm. How long did this malting dance last? This is where Egyptologists get tangled like wet reeds. Tomb paintings show the process, but give no timings. Some scholars, extrapolating from traditional African methods, suggest 3 to 5 days. Others, studying residue analysis, argue for shorter periods to limit rootlet growth, which could add unwanted bitterness. Kenny seems to work by instinct, checking the sprout length by eye and feel underfoot. When the white root is as long as the grain itself, but before it gets hairy and tough, he mutters, bending to pluck a sample. That's the sweet spot. Too short, no power. Too long, bitter bite. The exact timing, lost to the dry Egyptian air, as ephemeral as the morning mist on the Nile. We know they did it, and did it well enough to sustain an empire, but the precise recipe? That remains a sprout of contention. Your feet settle into the rhythm. Shuffle, lift, shuffle. The cool grain is soothing, almost meditative. You focus on the texture, the slight resistance, the way the matted grains cling. You notice Kenny occasionally bending down, not just to check a sprout, but to scoop up a handful of grain and hold it near his ear. You mimic him, cupping a handful close. At first, you hear nothing. Then, faintly, a subtle ticking, a soft crackling. It's the sound of countless tiny roots and shoots pushing against their husks, growing in the humid dark beneath the surface. It's the sound of potential sweetness being unlocked grain by grain. Hear it. Kenny grins, seeing your expression. Life humming. The hard seed becoming soft, becoming ready for the fire and the water. He pats your shoulder. Good feet, Nebbit. You dance well for Stonehauler. The afternoon wears on under the relentless sun, though the shaded malting floor offers some respite. The rhythmic shuffle continues. Workers rotate in and out, keeping the grain bed turned and evenly moist. The air fills with the scent of wet earth, growing grain, and warm, clean sweat. Your mind drifts, lulled by the repetitive motion and the soft crunch shuffle underfoot. You think of the stones waiting tomorrow, the heat, the dust. But for now, there's just this dance on a carpet of awakening barley, coaxing forth the sweetness that will soon become your daily bread and your nightly solace. Your feet are pleasantly tired, the grain's a cool massage. The promise of the beer feels more tangible now, rooted in this slow, deliberate awakening under the watchful eyes of Kenny and the blazing sun god above. Section 3. The rhythmic shuffle of the malting floor fades into memory. R.A. dips lower, painting the western sky in fiery hues, casting long, cool shadows across the brewery courtyard. The damp, sprouted barley lies spread on mats, its tiny white roots now almost as long as the grains themselves, a testament to days of patient tending. Kenny strides over, crunching a sprout between his teeth. He nods, a curt, satisfied gesture. Enough dancing. Time for the fire's kiss. Workers swiftly gather the precious malted barley, now lighter and fluffier than the soaked grain, into baskets. You follow the procession towards a structure radiating palpable heat, the bakery adjacent to the brewery. The bakery is a realm of intense, dry heat, a stark contrast to the humid malting floor. Massive, beehive-shaped mud brick ovens, tanners, glow with the remnants of the day's bread baking. Sweating bakers, clad only in loincloths, wield long wooden paddles. The air is thick with the glorious, comforting scent of baking bread. But this isn't the fine, white loaves destined for the Pharaoh's table. Kenny points to a pile of coarse, dark flour ground earlier from the malted barley. Our magic bread, he declares. Booza, not for chewing, for brewing. Your task becomes clear. Mixing. Large, shallow stone basins hold the coarse, slightly sweet-smelling malt flour. You add measured amounts of water from clay jars. Not too much, Kenny warns, just enough to form a thick, sticky dough. There's no yeast added here. That comes later. You plunge your hands in, the mixture cool at first, but quickly warming from the ambient heat. It's sticky, clinging to your fingers like thick mud. You knead and fold, mimicking the baker beside you. It's hard work, the dough resisting, developing a rough elasticity. Work it hard, neb it, the baker grunts. Needs strength, needs to hold the fire. The dough isn't meant to rise like leavened bread. It's meant to be a dense carrier of concentrated, toasted sugars. The Egyptians didn't directly mash malted grain like modern brewers. Instead, they baked a special, dense, partially baked bread called booza, or sometimes referred to as beer bread. This crucial step gelatinized the starches within the malted barley, making them accessible for conversion into fermentable sugars later in the process. It was a two-step genius. Bread making was the first stage of brewing. The loaves take shape, not the familiar round domes, but thick, flat discs or conical lumps, deliberately underbaked. You help slap the dough onto long, flat wooden paddles. The baker slides them deep into the fierce heat of the oven's maw. The intense, direct heat is crucial. You watch, mesmerized as the dough surfaces blister and darken rapidly, forming a tough, dark crust, sometimes almost charred on the outside. But inside, it remains doughy, even slightly gooey. Kenny explains, tapping a cooled loaf. See? Hard shell, soft heart. The fire locks the sweetness in, stops the little root growing further, but doesn't cook it all away. Burn the outside, save the inside. That's the trick. This partial baking preserved the vital enzymes needed for the next stage. And the charred crust? It might have contributed subtle smoky notes to the final beer, an ancient precursor to modern smoked malts. How charred was this beer bread supposed to be? This is where Egyptologists peer into tomb paintings and scratch their heads. Some depictions clearly show very dark, even blackened loaves. Residue analysis from ancient brewing sites often finds charred grain particles. But was the char intentional for flavor, or simply the unavoidable result of baking dense dough in incredibly hot ovens? Some scholars argue the dark crust was essential for preservation during storage or transport before brewing. Others believe a light toasting was the goal, and the char seen in art or found in residues is accidental overbaking. Kenny's baker today clearly aims for a deep brown, almost black crust, pulling the loaves out just before flames lick them. The blacker the shell, the sweeter the beer, you venture. The baker just shrugs, wiping sweat from his brow. My father baked them like this. His father, too, makes the beer taste solid. The ideal level of toastiness remains a delicious, millennia-old mystery lost in the oven's heat. The heat is intense. Sweat stings your eyes. The rhythmic slap of dough on paddles, the scrape against the oven's lip, the hiss of moisture hitting hot clay. It's a symphony of production. You help retrieve the baked boozle loaves. They're surprisingly heavy. The crust hard as sun-baked mud brick, radiating warmth. You accidentally brush one against your arm. It's hot. You juggle it for a second before setting it down on a woven reed tray to cool. Kenny picks up a cooled loaf and wraps it sharply against the stone basin. It makes a hollow, resonant thunk. Good, he grunts. Strong shell. Soft soul inside. He breaks off a piece of the crust. It's brittle, snapping cleanly. He offers you a tiny fragment of the dark, charred outer layer. You tentatively nibble. It's intensely bitter, almost acrid, with a sharp, burnt taste. Not pleasant. But then he crumbles a bit, revealing the pale, crumbly interior that hasn't fully cooked. He offers this. It tastes different, nutty, slightly sweet, malty, with a raw grain edge. This is where the potential lies, hidden beneath the protective, bitter armor. The trays fill with the oddly shaped, dark boozle loaves. They don't look like food, they look like fuel. But you understand now. This isn't bread for the belly, it's bread for transformation. Each dense, partially baked loaf is a vessel, a concentrated packet of potential sweetness, locked by fire, waiting to be unleashed in water. The scent of the bakery, burnt grain, hot clay, and the underlying sweetness of malt clings to your tunic. Your arms ache from kneading and handling the hot loaves, but there's a sense of accomplishment. The grain has been awakened, kissed by fire, and is now ready for its greatest metamorphosis. Tomorrow, the breaking begins. For now, the boozer rests, cooling under the watchful stars, holding its secrets tight within its hard, dark shell. The lingering scent of burnt crust and warm malt from the bakery clings to the pre-dawn air as you return to the brewery courtyard. RA hasn't yet breached the horizon, but the sky is a deep indigo, fading to violet. Cooler air brushes your skin, a welcome change. Stacked like dark, oddly shaped bricks under reed mats are yesterday's boozle loaves. Kenny is already there, using a heavy stone pestle to methodically break a loaf into rough chunks against the lip of a massive, shallow stone basin. The hard crust shatters with sharp cracks, revealing the pale, crumbly interior. "Wake up, Nebbit," he calls not unkindly. Time to make the mash sing. You grab another loaf. It's surprisingly dense and cool. Following Kenny's lead, you raise it high and bring it down sharply against the basin's thick stone rim. Thwack! The impact jolts your arms. The tough outer shell fractures, crumbling into dark shards. Inside, the softer, doughy core breaks apart into coarse lumps and pale powder. It's strangely satisfying work, this controlled destruction. Basket by basket, the broken booza pieces pile up in the basin. A rough mosaic of dark crust and pale, starchy innards. Kenny gestures towards large, rounded stones resting nearby. Now the real work, the mashing. You heft one of the stones, a smooth, heavy river rock worn perfectly round by water and time. It fits snugly in your hands. Kenny scoops cool, clear Nile water from a large storage jar and pours it slowly over the pile of broken bread. The water hisses softly as it hits the dry crust fragments, then pools around the pale lumps. Not too much, he cautions. Just enough to wet it all, like soaking sand before building bricks. He plunges his own rock into the mixture and begins a rhythmic pounding. Lift, drop, twist, lift, drop, twist. It's a slow, deliberate motion. We don't want paste. We want sweet water. Break it. Mix it. Let the water find the treasure inside. This stage, called mashing today, involved mixing the crushed, partially baked malted barley bread, buza, with water. The goal was to dissolve the starches and sugars created during malting and preserved by the partial baking, creating a sweet liquid called wort. The enzymes activated during malting were still present and active in the warm water, continuing to convert starches into fermentable sugars. The Egyptians were essentially creating a nutrient-rich soup for yeast, millennia before understanding microbiology. As you begin your own rhythmic pounding beside Kenny, another brewer arrives carrying a large, coarse-woven bag. He pours a generous stream of thick, sticky, amber liquid into the basin date juice. Its rich, caramel-like scent instantly mingles with the wet grain and crust. Kenny nods. The sweetener's sweetener helps the shy sugars wake up fully. The date juice wasn't just for flavor, though it was delicious. Its natural sugars provided an immediate food source for the wild yeast to come, giving fermentation a kickstart. But the real hidden gem? Date juice contains natural enzymes, invertase, that can further break down complex sugars into simpler ones yeast loves, boosting efficiency. An ancient enzymatic booster shot. Kenny winks. Grandmother's trick. Makes the beer friendlier. He doesn't know why it works, just that it does. How thoroughly did they crush and mash? Tomb paintings often show workers vigorously pounding mixtures in large vats, suggesting a thorough breakdown. However, residue analysis from ancient Egyptian beer strainers often reveals surprisingly large fragments of grain and bread crust. Does this mean their mashing was inefficient, or was it deliberate? Some scholars argue that a coarser mash allowed for easier lautering, separating the liquid wort from the solids, using their simple reed mats or cloths. Others suggest the crust fragments might have acted like a primitive filter bed during the next stage. A few even propose that the texture, bits of grain and crust floating in the beer, was simply expected and part of the experience, adding body and a chewy element, like a very rustic porridge beer. Kenny's technique seems pragmatic. He pounds until the mixture looks like thick, lumpy porridge swimming in increasingly cloudy, beige liquid, stopping well short of a smooth paste. Enough, he grunts eventually, wiping sweat from his brow. The water looks hungry. It's found the sweetness. Now it needs time to drink deep. The quest for the perfect mash consistency remains, quite literally, a murky area in Egyptology. Your arms burn pleasantly. The repetitive lift-drop-twist motion is meditative. The basin holds a thick, warm, porridge-like concoction, the mash. It smells deeply grainy, earthy, and now carries the unmistakable, rich caramel undertone of the dates. Tiny bubbles already cling to the crust fragments trapped in the viscous liquid. Kenny plunges a clean reed stalk into the mixture, pulls it out, and lets a drop fall onto his weathered palm. He tastes it cautiously. His eyes crinkle slightly. Good. Sweet start. He offers the reed to you. You mimic him. The drop is warm, thick, and shockingly sweet, like liquid bread with a distinct caramel honey note. It's grainy, yes, but undeniably pleasant. This is the taste of potential, the dissolved essence of the barley and dates, the promise of fermentation to come. It's already more appealing than the charred crust fragment you tasted yesterday. Kenny covers the stone basin loosely with a dampened reed mat. Now, he says, his voice dropping to a near whisper, as if respecting the process unfolding within. We let it dream. The water and the bread, they need to talk quietly, to share their secrets. He gestures towards the eastern horizon, where Ra's first golden sliver is finally appearing. By the time he climbs high, the magic will be ready to strain. You look down at the covered basin. Beneath the mat, unseen, enzymes are diligently at work, converting starches into sugars, water into wort. The air hangs heavy with the sweet, malty, date-infused scent. Your arms ache, but the taste lingers on your tongue. The first unfermented whisper of the beer that will soon quench the thirst of an empire. The symphony of stone on crust has ended. Now begins the quiet conversation within the mash. The covered mash basin sat like a dormant beast under the climbing sun. Ra's heat pressed down, but beneath the damp reed mat, a quiet alchemy was unfolding. Kenny finally stirred, peeling back the covering with a reverence usually reserved for temple rites. The scent that billowed out was deeper, richer, sweeter than before. Warm grain, caramelized dates, and something almost floral emerging from the warm, thick porridge. Tiny bubbles clustered around the crust fragments like miniature pearls. Kenny dipped a finger, tasted, and grunted. Good talk. Ready to give up its gold. He gestured to a large, shallow, slightly tilted stone surface nearby, covered with a finely woven reed mat. Bring the basin. Gently now. This is where we catch the sweetness. Together, you and another brewer heft the heavy stone basin. The mash inside sloshes thickly, clinging to itself. Carefully, you tilt it over the prepared reed mat. The thick, warm, beige-brown slurry flows sluggishly onto the woven surface. At first, it just pools, reluctant to move. Kenny stands ready with a smooth, flat stone pestle. Patience, Nebbit. Help it find the path. He begins gently pressing and swirling the pestle over the surface of the mash mass on the mat. Not smashing, but guiding. It's like coaxing honey from a comb. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, a stream of liquid, clearer and lighter in color than the mash, begins to seep through the tight weave of the reeds. It trickles down the slight incline of the stone surface, gathering in a groove carved along its lower edge, which feeds into a large, waiting clay amphora zir. Your task is clear. Manage the flow. You take another pestle and mimic Kenny's gentle, insistent pressure. The sensation is fascinating. The mash is warm, thick, and yielding under the stone, yet resistant. You feel the crust fragments and larger grain pieces being held back by the mat, while the precious, sweet liquid is persuaded to escape. It's a tactile dance of pressure and release. Too hard, and you risk tearing the mat or forcing solids through. Too soft, and the liquid just sits. You find a rhythm, pressing, swirling, feeling the liquid seep away beneath your tool. The trickle becomes a steady stream, a translucent amber rivulet, catching the sunlight, flowing like liquid gold into the waiting jar. The smell intensifies sweet malt, dates, a clean, grainy freshness. This is the wort, the lifeblood of the future beer. This stage, called lautering, separates the sweet liquid wort from the spent grain solids. The Egyptians used simple, effective technology, woven reed mats or coarse linen cloths acting as filters. The wort collected in the amphora was now ready for fermentation. carrying all the dissolved sugars and nutrients extracted from the malted bread and dates. The spent grains left on the mat were likely used as animal feed or fertilizer, minimizing waste. As you work, Kenny occasionally pauses to lift a corner of the reed mat. Underneath, the filtered wort runs clear and bright. He points to the mat itself, its underside coated with a sticky, pale layer of fine sediment and proteins that didn't make it through the weave. The wort's first veil, he murmurs, catches the cloudiness. This crude filtration wasn't perfect, but it significantly clarified the wort compared to the thick mash. Surprisingly, this sediment layer might have acted like a primitive filter aid, actually helping trap finer particles as more wort flowed through, improving clarity with each batch. It was an unintentional, self-improving system born of necessity and simple materials. Kenny taps the sticky layer. Good mat. Knows its job. He doesn't scrub it off. He lets it be part of the process. How clear did the Egyptians want their beer? Tomb paintings often depict beer being poured from jugs, showing it as a cloudy, thick liquid, sometimes with visible particles. Residue analysis confirms ancient Egyptian beer contained significant suspended solids. Was this a flaw or a feature? Scholars are divided. Some argue the cloudiness was unavoidable with their technology and coarse ingredients, and Egyptians simply accepted it. Others believe the texture, thick, porridge-like, almost soupy, was deliberate and preferred, providing more calories and substance, making it a true liquid bread. There's even evidence they sometimes added chunks of bread or fruit directly to the drinking vessel. Was their ideal beer a crystal clear brew or a hearty, nutritious gruel? Kenny's wort is surprisingly clear after filtering a lovely amber, but you know wild yeast and time will cloud it again. He seems unconcerned with absolute clarity. The cloud holds strength, he says simply, watching the golden stream. The debate over ancient beer aesthetics remains as hazy as the brew itself. The amphora fills steadily. The sound is hypnotic. The gentle squelch pad of the pestles on the mash. The soft drip-drip trickle of the wort flowing into the clay jar. The spent grain mass on the mat becomes drier, more compact, a dark, dense cake holding back the last dregs of sweetness. You press firmly, coaxing the final amber drops from the residue. The scent is intoxicatingly sweet and fresh. Kenny declares the first runnings complete. He then does something unexpected. He takes a jar of clean water and pours it carefully over the spent grain cake on the mat. A little rinse for the shy ones, he explains. He presses again, yielding a second, thinner, paler stream of liquid, the sparging step washing out residual sugars. This weaker wort might be used for a lower alcohol beer or added to the main batch. Efficiency even then. Finally, the reed mat holds only the compacted, dark spent grains. The amphora beneath is nearly full of beautiful, sweet-smelling wort, the color of sunlit honey. Kenny dips a small clay cup into the stream before it enters the jar and offers it to you. The sweetness pure, he says. You sip. It's warm, viscous, intensely sweet, like liquid dates blended with toasted grain syrup. It's cloying, lacking the tang that will come, but undeniably rich and promising. This is the essence captured, the potential energy drawn from the barley and dates, ready for the final, invisible transformation. You look from the golden liquid in the jar to the dark, spent cake on the reed mat. The alchemy of separation is complete. The solid is given its all. The liquid holds the future. The brewery courtyard hums with the quiet satisfaction of work well done, the air thick with the promise of fermentation soon to begin. The gold is strained. Now it waits for life. The last golden drops of wort have ceased their flow into the amphora. The air still hums with the rich, sweet scent of malt and dates, but the courtyard feels quieter, the frantic activity of straining replaced by a focused calm. Kenny runs a calloused hand over the smooth curve of the now full amphora, a massive clay vessel standing nearly as tall as he is. Its wide belly holds the precious liquid, the potential beer. He nods towards a cluster of similar vessels resting in the shade against a mud brick wall. These are different. Larger, wider mouth, their unglazed surfaces porous and dry. Home for the sweetness, Kenny declares. Time to wake the giants. You follow him to the resting Zeers. Up close, you see they aren't pristine. Their interiors are stained in rings of deep ochre, brown, and black, the layered history of countless brews. The clay feels cool and rough under your fingertips. Kenny hands you a coarse brush made from stiff palm fibers bound to a stick. Scrub, he instructs simply. Clean outside, clean inside, but not too clean. He winks. The good ghosts live in the walls. You set to work. Brushing the exterior is straightforward, dislodging dust and cobwebs. Inside is trickier. You reach deep into the wide mouth, scrubbing the curved walls. The brush scrapes against the rough clay, dislodging dried sediment, revealing the paler clay beneath in streaks. The scent that rises is complex, stale grain, faint sourness, a deep earthiness, layered over the ghost of countless fermented brews. It's not unpleasant. It smells lived in, seasoned. Kenny watches your efforts, then stops you. Enough. We want the ghosts, remember? Just the loose stuff gone. The patina stays. That's where the magic hides. He taps the stained interior meaningfully. Fermentation occurred in large, porous clay vessels called Zeers. These were often partially buried in the ground or kept in cool, shaded areas to help regulate temperature during the crucial fermentation process. Their porous nature allowed gases to escape and potentially helped cool the contents through evaporation. The Egyptians understood empirically that cleanliness mattered, but their concept differed from modern sanitation. They valued the microbial communities, ghosts, established in a well-used vessel. Kenny reaches for a smaller pot containing a thick, sticky, aromatic substance that looks like dark honey but smells intensely resinous, terebinth resin. Using a flat wooden spatula, he carefully smears a thick layer of this resin around the interior rim of the Zeer, just below the lip and around the groove where the lid will sit. Keeps the whispers in and the flies out, he grunts. This resin sealant did more than just create an airtight seal for the lid. Terebinth resin has mild antibacterial and antifungal properties. While the Egyptians wouldn't have understood microbes, they knew this resin lining helped prevent spoilage organisms from taking hold, giving their desired wild yeast, the good ghosts, a head start. An ancient, aromatic preservative. He hands you the spatula. Your turn. Seal its lips. Just how crucial was this resin lining? And how common? This is a sticky point, pun intended, among archaeologists. Resin residues are sometimes found on ancient brewing pottery, but far from always. Was it reserved for special brews or routine? Did they understand its preservative properties, or was it purely for sealing? Some scholars argue the resin's primary function was indeed just to seal the lid effectively. Others point to its known medicinal uses in Egypt and suggests its antiseptic qualities were deliberately exploited. A few even proposed the resin contributed a distinct flavor, piney, medicinal, that was desired in certain beers. Kinney applies it meticulously, treating it as essential. My grandfather's Zier cracked once. He mutters as you work, no resin. Beer turns sour faster than milk in the sun. Lesson learned. Whether universally used or not, for Kinney, the resin is non-negotiable, the guardian of the ghosts. With the Zier scrubbed, but not too clean, and its rim sealed with fragrant resin, it's time for the transfer. Using woven reed slings and strong arms, you and others carefully tip the heavy amphora of wort. The glorious amber liquid glugs and splashes into the waiting Zier, filling its cool, dark interior. The sound echoes within the vessel, a deep, resonant glug glug glug. The sweet, malty date scent rises powerfully, mingling with the earthy aroma of the seasoned clay and the sharp tang of the fresh resin. You fill it almost to the brim, leaving just a hand's width of space below the resin-sealed rim. Finally, Kinney brings the lid, a heavy, concave disc of fired clay. He presses it firmly into the resin-lined groove. A satisfying thunk seals the deal. He then drapes a thick, dampened reed mat over the entire lid and down the sides of the Zier, securing it with palm fiber ropes. Keeps Ra's heat out and the cool earth's breath in, he explains, and keeps the whispers private. He pats the damp mat covering the sealed vessel. The Zier now sits like a sleeping giant, its belly full of potential, shielded from the world. You step back. The courtyard feels charged with anticipation. The messy work of grains, water, fire, and straining is done. The booza has been transformed, its sweetness captured and confined. Now, the invisible takes over. Within the cool, dark, resin-sealed embrace of the seasoned Zier, the good ghosts, the wild yeast clinging to its stained walls and floating in the air, are about to stir. They will find the sweet wort, the date sugars, and begin their silent feast. The air is still thick with the scent of malt and resin. But beneath it, if you listen very closely, you might imagine the faintest, tiniest hiss starting deep within the clay. Not a sound, really. More feeling. A promise. The quiet before the microscopic storm. The Zier holds its secret. All you can do now is wait and trust the ghosts. The sealed Zier sits like a slumbering beast in the shaded corner of the courtyard. Days pass under Ra's relentless gaze. The frantic energy of milling, baking, mashing, and straining has ebbed. Now, the brewery thrums with a quieter tension, the anticipation of invisible labor. You walk past the vessel, your steps instinctively lighter. Kinney often pauses nearby, head tilted, eyes distant, listening. Hear it? He asks you on the third morning, his voice barely above a whisper. You stop, hold your breath. At first, nothing. Then, faintly a soft, rhythmic glug, glug, glug emanates from deep within the clay like a giant slow heartbeat. A tiny bubble escapes the imperfect seal around the damp reed mat covering the lid, popping with a scent of warm bread and ripe fruit. The ghosts are awake. The feast has begun. Kinney kneels by the Zier, carefully peeling back a corner of the damp reed mat covering the lid. He doesn't remove it, just creates a small gap. The scent that rushes out is transformed. Gone is the simple sweetness of the wort. Now, it's layered, complex, the malt and dates still there, but overlaid with a heady aroma like rising bread dough, bruised apples, and a faint, pleasant sharpness. It's alive, vibrant. He gestures for you to come closer. Listen deeper, he murmurs. You crouch beside him, ear near the gap. Beneath the slow glugs, there's a constant, low fizzing sound, like thousands of tiny grains of sand falling through an hourglass, or distant papyrus reeds whispering secrets in the night breeze. It's the sound of countless microscopic lives feasting, multiplying, exhaling gas. The Zir is breathing. They're hungry little things, Kenny says, a hint of pride in his voice, turning sweetness into spirit. He dips a long, clean reed straw through the gap in the covering, down into the liquid. He pulls it out, its length coated in a thin, creamy brown foam. He offers you the tip. A tiny drop clings to it. You taste it. The shock is immediate. The intense, cloying sweetness is gone, replaced by a bright tang, a pleasant bitterness beneath the grain flavor, and a faint, almost prickly sensation on your tongue. It's still sweet, but balanced now, alive, with a distinct character emerging. The transformation is palpable, magical. This is no longer wort. This is becoming beer. Fermentation, driven by wild yeast naturally present in the environment and clinging to the season's ear, converts the wort's sugars into alcohol and carbon dioxide, CO2. The glugs are CO2 bubbles escaping through the liquid and any small gaps. The changing aromas and flavors are the byproducts of this metabolic process. Esters, fruity notes, phenols, spicy/earthy notes, and the development of alcohol. The Egyptians witnessed this transformation for millennia without knowing the science, attributing it to divine forces or the spirit within the ingredients. Kenny points to the damp exterior of the Zir. Beads of moisture condense on the cool clay surface, trickling slowly down its curve. Sweating, he observes, good sign, means the little ones are working hard, making heat. He places the back of his hand against the clay. It feels distinctly warmer than the surrounding air. This evaporative cooling effect, moisture wicking through the porous clay and evaporating, was crucial. It naturally regulated the temperature inside the Zir, preventing it from overheating during the vigorous early stages of fermentation, which could kill the yeast or create harsh off flavors. Their primitive Zir was, unintentionally, an early form of temperature-controlled fermentation vessel. The earth helps, Kenny nods, patting the ground beside the vessel. Steady and cool. How long did they let it ferment? This is a question that keeps Egyptologists brewing arguments. Tomb scenes show the process, but lack timetables. Residue analysis gives clues about ingredients and alcohol content, estimated 3 to 5%, but not duration. Did they ferment until the glugs stopped, indicating sugar depletion? Or did they stop it earlier for a sweeter, lower alcohol beer? Some texts mention tasting to determine readiness, suggesting variable times based on desired outcome. Kenny seems to work by instinct, smell, taste, and sound. He sniffs deeply at the gap daily. When a sharp bite softens and the fruit smell deepens like dates left in the sun, he muses, then it's ready to quiet down. He might stop a batch early for workers needing refreshment without too much buzz, but let it run longer for a stronger brew for festivals or offerings. The exact fermentation schedules remain as individual and variable as the brewers themselves, lost in the daily rhythm of ancient life. The Zir continues its slow, rhythmic glugging, the foam clinging to Kenny's reed straw. The krausen builds daily, a creamy, mottled cap visible through the gap. It smells bready, yeasty, enticing. Occasionally, a larger bubble erupts, sending a puff of that complex, fermenting aroma into the courtyard air. Workers passing by pause, nostrils flaring, smiles touching their lips. They know what that scent means. Reward is coming. You find yourself drawn to the vessel multiple times a day just to listen to its whispers, to feel its warmth, to sense the invisible frenzy within. It's a living thing, this giant jar. The air around it hums with a low fizz, a constant, soothing white noise. You watch Kenny carefully adjust the damp reed mat covering, ensuring shade and moisture, tending to the unseen workers inside with the quiet respect of a shepherd watching his flock. The barley has been awakened, baked, dissolved, and strained. Now, the silent, ancient alchemists, the wild yeast, the good ghosts, are weaving sweetness into spirit, water into sustenance, grain into the heartbeat of Egypt. The zir sings its slow, bubbling song, a lullaby of transformation. All you can do is listen, wait, and guard its dreams. The zir's bubbling song has quieted. The once frequent glugs now come only occasionally, lazy and contented, like a dozing crocodile's exhales. The damp reed mat covering the vessel remains cool to the touch. No more feverish sweating from vigorous fermentation. Kenny lifts the mat's edge with ceremonial slowness. The scent that escapes is deep, complex, toasted grain, overripe dates, a whisper of something like damp earth after rain. He dips a clean reed straw deep into the liquid and withdraws it coated in a thin, persistent foam. The taste he offers you is startling. No longer the bright tang of active fermentation, but rounded, balanced, with a pleasant bitterness beneath the sweetness. The prickle on your tongue is softer now, warmer. The ghosts are resting, Kenny murmurs. Their work is done. Now we taste the reward. The courtyard buzzes with quiet activity. Workers bring clean, narrow-necked amphorae, their interiors still damp from rinsing. Kenny removes the zir's lid completely, revealing the transformed liquid within. The beer is cloudy, a rich amber brown, its surface dotted with lingering bubbles. A thick layer of sediment, spent yeast, grain particles, and date remnants coats the bottom. Kenny hands you a long, curved siphon made from a hollow reed stalk fitted with a crude clay filter at one end. Slow and steady, he instructs. We take the clear, leave the mud. You kneel beside the zir, the siphon trembling slightly in your hands. Kenny guides you. One end dipped just below the surface, avoiding the floating debris, the other hovering over an empty amphora. You suck gently on a reed's end, and suddenly the beer flows, a golden brown stream glugging through the makeshift siphon. The filter does its job, catching larger particles, though the liquid remains hazy. The amphora fills steadily, the beer's rich, bready aroma intensifying in the open air. Kenny occasionally dips a finger into the stream, tasting, nodding. Good body, good strength. The gods will be pleased. He means the workers, of course, the real recipients of this divine labor. This careful decanting separated the clearer beer from the sediment, lees in the zir. While modern brewers might filter extensively, the Egyptians valued texture and nutritional content, accepting, even preferring, some cloudiness. The beer was often consumed fresh, as storage could lead to further fermentation or spoilage. What wasn't drunk immediately might be sealed in amphorae with a dab of resin to preserve it slightly longer. As you fill the last amphora, Kenny does something unexpected. He scoops a portion of the thick, yeasty sediment from the zir's bottom into a small clay pot. The mother, he says reverently. For next time, This slurry of active yeast cells was essentially an ancient sourdough starter, a way to inoculate future batches with a proven, desirable culture. While they didn't understand microbiology, the Egyptians recognized that saving some sediment from a good brew improved the next one. This practice hints at early domestication of yeast strains, a precursor to modern brewing techniques. He covers the pot with a cloth and sets it aside in the shade. Happy ghosts make happy beer, he winks. Just how clear was Egyptian beer supposed to be? Residue analyses reveal a spectrum. Some vessels show fine straining, others contain chunks of bread or fruit. Was clarity a mark of quality, or did texture indicate richness? Scholars debate whether the famous beer strainers found in tombs were for clarifying the drink or for holding flavor additives like dates or herbs during consumption. Kinney's method suggests a middle path, removing the gross sediment but embracing the haze. He even reserves a few amphorae unfiltered, packed with extra dates and spices. For those who like their beer substantial, he grins. The diversity in straining methods likely reflected personal taste, occasion, and social status more than any rigid standard. The filled amphorae stand in a neat row, their narrow necks stoppered with plugs of Nile clay. Kinney takes the first one, pours a generous measure into a wide, shallow drinking bowl, and hands it to you. Taste properly now, he commands. The beer is cool, slightly effervescent, its body thicker than water, but not quite porridge-like. The first sip blooms on your tongue, malt sweetness balanced by that distinctive tang, the dates lending caramel depth, a subtle earthiness from the wild yeast. It's surprisingly refreshing, more complex than you imagined. The aftertaste lingers pleasantly, inviting another sip. Around you, workers queue eagerly for their ration. Kinney watches their faces as they drink, reading their reactions like sacred texts. A nod here, a thoughtful frown there. We'll add more dates to the next batch, he mutters to himself. And maybe a pinch of coriander. The Zir sits empty now, its ghost spent but not gone. Their essence lives in the mother starter, in the satisfied sighs of the drinkers, in the amber liquid that will fuel tomorrow's labor. The beer is born. The circle is complete. The first sip of freshly poured beer still lingers on your tongue, sweet, tangy, alive, when a horn blast shatters the courtyard's calm. Workers straighten, their drinking bowls pausing mid-air. Kinney sighs, setting down his own bowl with exaggerated care. The overseer's thirst arrives right on schedule. He gestures toward the brewery gate, where a tall, lean man in a pleated linen kilt stands, one hand resting on his hip, the other tapping an impatient rhythm against his thigh. His eyes scan the freshly filled amphorae with the practiced calculation of a tax collector. Well, Nebbit, Kinney mutters under his breath. Time to see where your hard work really goes. The overseer, in Tef, as you'll learn, strides into the courtyard with the air of a man who knows his importance. His sandals click against the packed earth, his every movement precise, measured. He doesn't greet the workers. He inspects them, his sharp gaze cataloging their postures, their half-finished drinks, the state of their tools. When he reaches the row of amphorae, he stops, tilts his head, and exhales through his nose. This the new batch? He asks, though it's clearly not a question. Kinney nods, stepping forward. Brewed strong as ordered. Sweetened with dates from the southern orchards. Fermented 4 days. Intef makes a non-committal noise and snaps his fingers. A servant hurries forward with a shallow bronze-tasting cup, its surface polished to a mirror shine. Kinney fills it from the nearest amphora. the beer cascading in a smooth, amber stream. Intef lifts the cup to the light, studies the color, swirls it gently. He sniffs, sips, holds the liquid in his mouth for a long moment before swallowing. His expression gives nothing away. Acceptable, he declares at last, handing the cup back to his servant. But the aftertaste is rougher than last month's. The workers will complain. Kenny's jaw tightens, but his voice remains even. The barley was from the northern fields. The soil there is drier this season. Less sweetness in the grain. Intef arches a brow. Then compensate with more dates next time. Or honey. The men hauling stones for the pharaoh's tomb won't care about soil quality. They'll care that their beer doesn't taste like river mud. He turns on his heel, already moving toward the courtyard's ledger table, where a scribe waits with a stack of fresh papyrus. Mark this batch for the Western Quarry crews, he instructs. They'll drink anything. Save the smoother brews for the artisans. Beer was a standardized ration in ancient Egypt, distributed according to labor hierarchy. Tomb inscriptions and administrative records show that workers received daily allotments, typically 4 to 5 liters, with variations in quality based on status. Overseers and skilled artisans often received finer brews, while manual laborers got simpler, stronger batches. This wasn't just about taste. It was a calculated system of reward and control. As Intef and the scribe confer, you notice something curious. The scribe's ledger includes not just quantities, but names. Each amphora is marked with symbols indicating its destination. Quarry crews, temple builders, scribal schools, but also with tiny, intricate notes about the brew itself. One entry reads, Batch 14, month of parade. Barley from Delta, dates from Thebes. Fermented 5 days. For sculptor's crew, complained of sourness last time. This wasn't just inventory, it was quality control. The Egyptians tracked their beer like modern winemakers track vintages, adjusting recipes based on feedback from the drinkers. Kenny catches you looking and smirks. Oh yes, Nebbit. Even Pharaoh's accountants have opinions about beer. How much did taste really matter in a system where beer was essentially currency? Scholars are divided. Some argue that consistency was prioritized over nuance. Workers needed calories, not complexity. Others point to tomb art and texts that describe elaborate brewing variations for festivals, medicinal beers infused with herbs, and even regional specialties. Was the overseer's critique genuine concern for palate, or just performative micromanagement? Kenny's muttered reaction suggests the latter. Next he'll want it served in gold cups with a lotus garnish. But the scribe's notes hint at a deeper truth. Even in a rigid system, people cared about flavor. The debate, much like the beer itself, remains pleasantly hazy. The amphorae are loaded onto waiting donkeys, their stoppers sealed with clay stamped with the brewery's mark. Intef departs as abruptly as he arrived, his kilt flapping behind him. The courtyard exhales. Kenny retrieves his abandoned drinking bowl, takes a long, deliberate sip, and sighs. Rough aftertaste, my left foot, he grumbles. Perfectly good beer. He shakes his head, then glances at you. But next time, maybe a few more dates. Just in case. The workers chuckle, raising their bowls in agreement. Around you, the brewery hums back to life. Jugs clinking, reeds rustling, the low murmur of conversation weaving through the air. The beer, now officially approved, begins its journey to thirsty mouths across the city. Somewhere, a stonecutter pauses mid-chisel. A scribe sets down his brush. A farmer wipes his brow. All waiting for that first, refreshing sip of liquid wages. And back in the brewery, the Zier sits empty but not idle. Already, Kenny is eyeing the next batch of barley, the next round of malting, the next opportunity to outwheat the overseer's taste buds. The work, like the Nile, never stops. The overseer's shadow has barely faded from the brewery gate when a new commotion erupts, this time from the workers themselves. A group of quarrymen, their arms dusted with fine limestone powder, cluster around the remaining amphory like thirsty pigeons. One, a burly man with a sun-weathered face, waves his empty drinking bowl like a battle standard. "Kenny, you hoarding the good stuff back here? Our ration today tasted like it was strained through a scribe's sandal." Laughter ripples through the courtyard, edged with the sharpness of genuine grievance. Kenny rolls his eyes, but reaches for the nearest jar. Fine, but one taste each. I won't have Tef accusing me of spoiling you lot. You help pour small measures into outstretched bowls. The quarrymen drink with a focused reverence of connoisseurs, or maybe just desperately thirsty laborers. Their reactions are immediate and unfiltered. The burly one smacks his lips. Now that's beer, sweet as a delta sunset. His companion, a wiry man missing 2 fingers, frowns. Too sweet. Where's the bite? Tastes like something you'd give a temple dancer. A third worker, his scalp gleaming with sweat under a patchy fringe of hair, drains his bowl in one go and declares, "Perfect. Strong enough to make my wife pretty, but not so strong she'll steal my sandals." More laughter. Kenny observes this theatrical critique with folded arms. "You want bite? Next batch, I'll strain it through your sandals," he retorts. But you notice him subtly noting their preferences. The way his gaze flicks to the honey jar when the burly man praises sweetness. How he touches the bag of bitter herbs when the wiry one complains. This isn't just banter. It's market research, ancient Egyptian style. While beer was a standardized ration, personal taste still flourished. Workers often traded or pooled their daily allotments to get preferred varieties, and brewers adjusted recipes based on informal feedback. Tomb graffiti and ostraca, pottery shard notes, reveal playful debates about beer quality, proving that even in a highly structured society, individual palates demanded consideration. As the quarrymen depart, after sampling several more bowls, a young boy darts into the courtyard, clutching a small clay token stamped with a hieroglyphic beer jug. Kenny exchanges it for a half measure of beer, which the boy carefully carries away. His mother's a weaver, Kenny explains. Paid her in tokens last week, better than lugging grain through the streets. These tokens, found archaeologically at workers' settlements, acted as informal currency, redeemable for beer or bread. A clever system, lightweight, durable, and far less spillable than liquid wages. Just how much variety existed in everyday beer. Residue analyses show remarkable consistency in ingredients, but textual hints suggest subtle variations. Dates versus honey, longer fermentation for strength, added herbs for flavor or medicinal effect. Was this flexibility intentional or just the natural variation of pre-industrial brewing? Kenny's practice suggests both. He follows tradition but tweaks proportions based on who's drinking. The quarry crews like it's sweet and strong, he muses. The scribes? They pretend to prefer it dry and subtle. But catch them after a long night of accounting, he waggles his eyebrows. The line between daily ration and craft beer may have been thinner than we think. The courtyard empties as the last of the day's drinkers depart. Shadows lengthen across the packed earth, turning the scattered reed mats into golden trapezoids. Kenny surveys the emptier amphory with satisfaction. Good batch, he declares. Then, with a conspiratorial grin, better hide the last jar before Intef circles back. He stashes it behind a stack of grain sacks, a brewer's secret reserve. You linger as the first stars emerge, sipping the dregs of your own bowl. The beer is warm now, its flavors melding into something deeper, mellower. Around you, the brewery settles into its evening rhythm. A scribe stylus scratching inventory on a wax tablet, donkeys braying in the distance, the occasional glug from the still active fermentation jars. It's a symphony of mundane perfection. Kenny claps you on the shoulder. Rest, Nebbit. Tomorrow, we start again. He nods toward the sacks of fresh barley already waiting in the corner. The cycle is endless. Grain to bread, bread to beer, beer to wages, wages back to grain. But in this moment, with the taste of good beer on your tongue and the hum of contentment in the air, it feels less like a cycle and more like a ritual, an ancient, unbroken promise between earth and labor, brewer and drinker. Somewhere beyond the brewery walls, a worker laughs, his voice carrying through the twilight. The sound is bright, effortless. You wonder if it's the beer talking, or maybe just happiness, simple and uncomplicated, bubbling up from the clay of everyday life. The first light of dawn stains the brewery courtyard in pale gold, but Kenny is already awake, crouched beside a small fire pit where a clay pot emits tendrils of fragrant steam. He stirs its contents with a stick, his face illuminated by the flickering flames. As you approach, the scent hits you, earthy, herbal, with a sharp medicinal bite beneath the sweetness. Ah, Nebbit, he says without looking up. Just in time, the real magic begins. He gestures to the pot, for the headaches, and the enthusiasm of last night's tasting committee. You peer into the pot. A thick, dark syrup bubbles within, studded with recognizable fragments, juniper berries, coriander, something that might be myrrh. Kenny dips a wooden spoon in, lets the liquid drip slowly back into the pot. A brewer's duty doesn't end at beer, he intones, mock serious. Sometimes, we must also brew the cure for beer. He chuckles at his own joke, then sobers. Also, the scribes pay extra for this. He explains as he works, some beers are just for drinking. Others serve double duty, infused with herbs to soothe stomachs, ease pain, or, he lowers his voice, encourage certain moods. He nods toward a smaller amphora tucked in the shadows, its stopper sealed with red clay instead of the usual brown. That one's for the midwives. Dates, honey, and a pinch of blue lotus. Makes childbirth less screamy. Ancient Egyptian beer wasn't just sustenance, it was medicine. The Ebers Papyrus, circa 1550 BCE, lists over 100 beer-based remedies, from digestive aids to wound cleaners. The alcohol acted as a solvent for plant compounds, while the sugars and nutrients made bitter herbs more palatable. Brewers were early pharmacists, their workshops doubling as apothecaries. Kenny reaches for a small linen bag, loosens its drawstring, and shakes a few dried, crescent-shaped pods into his palm. Gemmet seeds, he murmurs, from the Easter traders. 1 pod per batch. No more, or the drinker sees too many gods. He drops one into the pot, where it dissolves almost instantly. You recognize it now. Syrian rue, a potent and slightly hallucinogenic plant used sparingly in temple rituals. Kenny's secular use of it is unconventional. For the astronomer priests, he explains, deadpan, helps them see the stars better. The line between sacred ritual and clever entrepreneurship, it seems, was always porous. Just how psychoactive were these specialty brews? Residue analyses confirm the presence of opium poppy, blue lotus, and other mind-altering plants in some vessels. But were they intentional additives or accidental contaminants? Scholars spar over whether these enhanced beers were rare ritual items or casual indulgences. Kenny's workshop suggests a pragmatic middle ground. Most beer was simple sustenance, but for the right price or the right client, a brewer could get creative. The trick, he confides as he strains the syrup into a small jar, is knowing who can handle their visions and who'll just vomit on your floor. The medicinal syrup finished, Kenny turns his attention back to the main event, today's brewing. But something has shifted. The ordinary grain and water now seem charged with possibility. Every batch, you realize, is a choice: nourishment, medicine, sacrament, or if the overseer isn't looking, a bit of fun. The brewery isn't just a factory. It's a laboratory, a temple, a social hub. As you help haul fresh barley to the malting floor, Kenny hums an old worker's song under his breath. The lyrics, when you catch them, are surprisingly irreverent. Oh, alright, shine bright, but not too hot / my head hurts from the beer I drank. You laugh. He winks. The sacred and the profane, the practical and the playful, all swirling together like sediment in a beer jug, inseparable and essential. The fire pit's embers fade, but the day's work is just beginning. Somewhere in the city, a scribe with a pounding headache waits for his medicinal brew. A midwife prepares her special amphora. An astronomer priest, perhaps, anticipates his next celestial vision. And in the courtyard, the barley waits, innocent and golden, for its transformation to begin again. The medicinal syrup has cooled, its surface forming a glossy, dark skin. Kenny carefully scrapes it into small clay jars, each sealed with a dab of resin and a scrap of linen. As he works, a commotion erupts at the brewery gate. Not the overseer's sharp sandal steps this time, but the rhythmic clatter of hooves and the jingle of bronze bridle ornaments. A chariot pulls up, its gold-edged wheels spraying dust. The driver, a muscular man with a Nubian bow slung across his back, calls out, "Brewer!" The lady Nefret sends for her order. Kenny's posture shifts instantly. He wipes his hands on his kilt and bows slightly. Of course. He hurries to the shadowed alcove where the red-stoppered amphorae rest, selecting two with particular care. You notice their clay is finer, their shapes more elegant than the workaday jars. Painted near the base of each is a tiny lotus blossom, the mark of a very specific clientele. The charioteer dismounts and accepts the amphorae, securing them in a padded wooden box lined with straw. His movements are reverent, as if handling temple offerings. Kenny leans in and murmurs something. A recipe reminder? A dosage warning? The charioteer nods, his face unreadable. As quickly as he arrived, he's gone, the chariot kicking up dust as it speeds toward the wealthier districts near the river. Kenny exhales, tension leaving his shoulders. Lady Nefret, he explains, has very particular tastes. He doesn't elaborate, but his glance toward the gemmet seed bag says enough. This isn't just beer. It's an experience, a luxury, a discreet escape for those who can afford it. You imagine perfumed gardens, whispered secrets, the blue lotus flowers floating in golden cups, a world away from the quarry workers' boisterous critiques. While most Egyptian beer was a daily staple, elite variations existed. Tomb paintings show nobles drinking from delicate vessels, often accompanied by lotus flowers, known for their mild psychoactive properties. These premium brews might include exotic ingredients like imported honey, pomegranate, or rare spices, marking them as status symbols as much as beverages. As you help tidy up, you notice a small clay tablet tucked behind the amphora shelf. It's covered in Kenny's cramped handwriting, orders, dates, and cryptic notes. One entry stands out. Lady Anne, batch 12. Extra lotus, half gemmet, paid in lapis lazuli beads. Another reads, Temple of Hathor, 3 amphorae, no herbs, extra honey for the dancers. This isn't just brewing. It's a bespoke service catering to the nuanced demands of priests, nobles, and performers. Kenny catches you looking and snatches the tablet away, but not before you see the final entry. Overseer and Tef. Weak batch, no dates. Let him complain to the pharaoh. The revenge of the brewer is subtle, but sweet. How widespread were these enhanced beers? Residue analyses from elite tombs often show traces of exotic additives. But was this common or exceptional? Some scholars argue that all beer likely contained mild psychoactives, simply due to shared brewing equipment. Others believe special batches were carefully curated for rituals or the elite. Kenny's ledger suggests both. Most beer was simple, but for those with means or connections, the brewery could provide something extra. The trick, he mutters, stashing the tablet in his belt, is remembering who gets what and when to plead ignorance. The courtyard settles back into its rhythm. The elite order is gone. The workaday brewing continues. But the brief visit lingers in the air like a rare perfume. It's a reminder that beer, in all its forms, is more than just a drink. It's a mirror of the society that brews it. Thirst, after all, is universal, but the ways of quenching it are as varied as the people who drink. As the sun climbs higher, Kenny returns to the fire pit, stirring a new batch of syrup. This one's simpler, just dates and ginger for the weaver's sore throats. The brewery embraces all comers, the thirsty, the pained, the celebrants, and the dreamers. And Kenny, the brewer apothecary, serves them all, one carefully calibrated brew at a time. The chariot dust has barely settled when a new figure appears at the brewery gate. Not a noble's messenger, not a thirsty worker, but a wiry old woman leaning on a staff topped with a carved ibis head. Her linen robe is plain, but impeccably clean, her eyes sharp as flint under the midday sun. The courtyard falls silent. Even Kenny pauses mid-stir. Merit, he says, with a deference you've never heard him use before. The House of Life honors us. The woman, Merit, sniffs. Honor the beer first, then me. She strides forward, her staff tapping a precise rhythm against the packed earth. Without asking, she dips a finger into Kenny's ginger date syrup, tastes it, and nods. Adequate. Now show me the real work. Kenny leads her to the fermentation ziers, their bellies full of quietly bubbling wort. Merit circles them like a hawk, her gaze missing nothing. She pries up a corner of one reed mat covering, sniffs the escaping gases, and grunts. Wild yeast is strong this season. Good. She turns to you suddenly. You, fetch me a clean reed. You scramble to obey. She takes the reed, inserts it into the zier, and withdraws a sample of the fermenting liquid. She doesn't drink it. Instead, she rubs a drop between her fingers, testing its viscosity, then lets it drip onto a polished bronze mirror from her belt pouch. She examines the bead's surface tension, its color in different lights. The ink is present, but the jet is weak. Kenny, uncharacteristically solemn, nods. I added extra emmer to this batch. For the bone-setting workshop. Merritt's eyes gleam. Wise. The calcium will help. She produces a small alabaster vial from her robes, uncorks it with her teeth, and adds a pinch of its contents, a fine green powder, to the zir. Wormwood, for the inflammation. The houses of life were ancient Egyptian medical institutions, where physician priests studied and practiced. Beer was a common medium for medicines, as its acidity helped extract plant compounds, and its sugars masked bitter flavors. The Eber's Papyrus prescribes beer-based remedies for everything from constipation to a woman's melancholy. As Merritt moves to the next zir, she pauses at a small, unassuming jar tucked in the corner. This one, Kenny hesitates. That's for the dreamers. She lifts the lid, sniffs, and her eyebrows rise. Blue lotus and Syrian rue? Who's the fool drinking this? The high priest of Ammonius? Kenny flushes. Merritt shakes her head, but doesn't scold. Instead, she adds a pinch of something from another vial. Mint, to keep the visions from curdling their stomachs. She fixes Kenny with a look. And charge them double. How much medical knowledge did brewers actually possess? While physicians like Merritt clearly understood certain active ingredients, the line between medicine, ritual, and folk wisdom was blurry. Residue analyses show that some medicinal additives had genuine anti-inflammatory or analgesic properties, like willow bark, a natural source of salicylic acid. Others, like ground lapis lazuli, were likely placebo or worse. Kenny's deference suggests brewers respected physicians' expertise, but his secret stash proves they didn't always follow it. Merritt finishes her rounds, wiping her hands on a clean cloth. Your beer is sound, she declares, but your record-keeping is donkey dung. She produces a fresh papyrus scrap and begins writing in swift, precise hieratics. Batch numbers, dates, additives, doses, or would you rather poison the next overseer by accident? Kenny accepts the scolding and the papyrus with surprising grace. As Merritt departs, staff tapping, he exhales. She trained under the royal physician at Memphis, he murmurs. Her tinctures saved half the quarry crew's last flood season. He studies her notes, then tucks them carefully into his belt. The encounter leaves the brewery subtly altered. The zirs no longer seem like simple fermentation vessels. They're apothecary jars, each a potential cure or curse. Kenny stirs the next batch with renewed focus, measuring wormwood with a steady hand. The beer will flow, as it always does, but now you understand its other life. As a carrier of healing, a liquid scalpel in the hands of those who know its secrets. The physician's visit lingers like the aftertaste of strong herbs, but the brewery's rhythm cannot pause. As R.A. begins his descent, a different kind of specialist arrives. A potter, his donkey laden with freshly fired zirs. Their unglazed surfaces glow terracotta red in the late light, still warm from the kiln. Kenny runs a practiced hand along one's curve, listening to the faint ping of his fingernail against the clay. Good ring, he declares. No cracks hiding. The potter, a wiry man named Jehudi, grins. Fired them with extra straw in the kiln. Makes the walls breathe better. He demonstrates by pouring a trickle of water down a zir's interior. It doesn't pool, but seeps slowly through the porous clay, evaporating on the outer surface. Cooler fermentation, he boasts. Smoother beer. Kenny nods appreciatively. but his gaze sharpens as he examines the rim of another vessel. This the new design. The rim is subtly thicker, with a deeper groove for resin sealing. Jehudi leans in. For your special batches, the groove holds more resin, keeps the vapors in. He wiggles his eyebrows. Or out. Egyptian pottery was incredibly sophisticated, with different clays and firing techniques tailored to specific uses. Brewing vessels like Ziers were designed to be porous enough for evaporative cooling, but sturdy enough to withstand constant use. Elite versions might include strainer spouts or internal filters, showing how craftsmanship evolved alongside brewing needs. As you help unload, Jehudi reveals his true masterpiece, a small, delicate Zier, its surface incised with lotus petals. For the lady's next order, he murmurs. But the real innovation is inside, a spiral ridge winding down the interior wall. Stirs the beer as you pour, he explains. Mixes the herbs evenly. Kenny's eyes gleam. He hands over a pouch of copper rings without haggling. How standardized were brewing vessels? Archaeologists find incredible diversity, from crude, oversized vats to elegant, specialized jars. Was this due to regional styles, evolving techniques, or simply the potter's whim? Jehudi's work suggests a mix. Most Ziers follow traditional forms, but clever artisans tweak designs for favorite clients. The spiral-stirring ridge? Stole the idea from a wine jug in Memphis, he confesses. Innovation, it seems, thrived in the shadows of tradition. As dusk falls, the new Ziers are arranged in the storeroom, their earthy scent mingling with the brewery's malt and yeast. Kenny places the lotus-carved one carefully apart, wrapped in linen, a tool awaiting its purpose. The others stand ready, their bellies empty but full of potential. Each is a silent partner in the alchemy to come, their clay walls destined to hold countless transformations. You run a hand over the nearest Zier, feeling the roughness of its unfired siblings, the smoothness of the seasoned veterans. They're more than containers. They're collaborators, shaping the beer as surely as the grain or the yeast. And somewhere in the future, when these two crack or chip, they'll return to the Nile's mud, completing the circle that began with last year's flood. The potter departs, his donkey's bells fading into the evening. Kenny remains, studying the new vessels with a quiet satisfaction. Good clay makes good beer, he says at last. Then, with a smirk, and good beer makes happy customers, even overseers. The new Ziers stand empty in the storeroom, their fresh clay scent still sharp when a commotion erupts outside. Not the usual bustle of workers or merchants, but the rhythmic clapping of hands and the bright jingle of sistrums. Kenny pauses, a sack of barley half dumped onto the malting floor. Ah, he mutters, wiping his brow. The Shada is early this year. You follow him to the gate, where a procession approaches. Temple acolytes in white linen lead the way, shaking gilded sistrums. Behind them, four muscular men carry a palanquin bearing a statue of Hathor, cow-eared, benevolent, her lap overflowing with grapevines and barley sheaves. At the rear, a priest in a leopard skin robe scatters dried petals. The crowd parts reverently, except for one wiry old woman who elbows forward. Merritt, the physician from yesterday. She catches Kenny's eye and nods toward the statue. Her thirst is legendary. The procession halts before the brewery. The leopard-clad priest steps forth, his voice booming. In the name of Hathor, Lady of Drunkenness, we come for the Shada. Kenny bows deeply, then gestures to you. Help me bring it. You follow him to a corner of the storeroom where a single Zier rests, its surface painted with intertwined vines and dancing figures. Unlike the others, it's sealed not with resin, but with honey-colored wax stamped with the temple's scarab seal. As you lift it, the liquid inside sloshes thickly, its scent seeping through the wax, heady sweet, with an almost floral sharpness beneath. The Shada was a special festival beer, sometimes wine, offered to Hathor, goddess of joy, music, and intoxication. Texts describe it as red as the Nile at dawn, and strong enough to make the gods themselves sing. Its exact recipe is lost, but residue analyses suggest ingredients like pomegranate, honey, and mandrake, a potent mix for sacred revelry. As you carry the Zier to the priest, Merit sidles up and whispers, "That batch has gemmet seeds from the temple's own garden. Triple strength." She nods toward the statue. Even Hathor might blush. Sure enough, the priest accepts the jar with unusual care, cradling it like a sleeping child. When he hands Kenny a small bronze ingot, payment or blessing, you notice the brewer slip a tiny pouch back to him, a private addition to the sacred brew. The exchange happens so smoothly you might have imagined it. How intoxicated did religious festivals get? Depictions range from decorous offerings to scenes of outright revelry. Some scholars argue that the Shada's mind-altering effects were symbolic, a spiritual rather than literal intoxication. Others point to temple records noting cleansing periods after festivals where priests abstained from all brews. Kenny's triple-strength batch suggests the truth was flexible. Hathor likes her devotees joyful. He murmurs as the procession moves on, sistrums jingling. And joy comes in many cups. The brewery returns to its routines, but the festival's energy lingers. Workers hum the procession song as they grind grain. Even the overseer seems less dour, sparing only a half-hearted critique of the day's mash. As night falls, distant laughter and music drift from the temple district. Kenny leans against the courtyard wall, sipping a cup of ordinary beer. They'll be dancing on the roofs by midnight, he chuckles. And cursing me at dawn. He doesn't sound sorry. You sip your own drink, watching the stars emerge. Somewhere, the Shada is being poured, its sacred strength loosening tongues and lifting spirits. And in the brewery, the next batch waits, humble, honest, and quietly potent in its own way. The gods may have their nectar, but the people have Kenny's beer, and that, it seems, is enough. The morning after the festival dawns hot and still, the kind of heat that clings to the skin like wet linen. The brewery courtyard, usually bustling by now, is eerily quiet. Kenny surveys the scene with a knowing smirk. Told you, he mutters. Hathor's hangover hits harder than a quarryman's hammer. Sure enough, the first worker to stagger in is one of yesterday's acolytes, his white robe now wrinkled and stained, his face the color of Nile silt. He groans, pressing his palms to his temples. "Brewer, mercy." Kenny sighs and reaches for a small clay cup, but not the beer amphora. Instead, he dips it into a jar of cloudy liquid from the physician's last visit. "Drink." Slowly, the acolyte gulps the concoction and promptly gags. "By the gods, what is that?" "Ground willow bark, mint, and fermented goat's milk," Kenny says cheerfully. Merit's recipe. The vomiting means it's working. As the acolyte stumbles away, presumably to fulfill the prophecy of the recipe, more sufferers arrive. A temple dancer still in her gauzy performance veils, a scribe clutching his head like it might roll away. even one of the quarrymen from earlier, though he insists he's just here to check on the next batch. Kenny dispenses remedies with the grim satisfaction of a man who's seen this play out 100 times. Ancient Egyptian hangover cures were as varied and occasionally dubious as modern ones. The Eber's Papyrus recommends a mix of crushed owl's egg, cabbage, and beer, though whether that was meant to cure or continue the intoxication is debatable. Merritt's willow bark tincture at least had scientific merit. Willow contains salicin, a precursor to aspirin. Amid the groaning sufferers, a small drama unfolds. The overseer in Tef arrives, his usual crisp pleats slightly rumpled, his glare slightly less sharp. He doesn't ask for help, just looms near the remedy jar until Kenny, with exaggerated innocence, offers a cup. Intef drinks it in one swallow, his face betraying nothing. But when he turns to leave, Kenny slips a second, smaller vial into his hand. Intef pockets it without comment. Later, you spot the vial's twin in Merritt's kit, labeled for stubborn asses. Add honey. The unspoken truce between bureaucrat and brewer holds. Just how prevalent was overindulgence in ancient Egypt? Tomb paintings show festive drinking, but rarely its consequences. Medical texts treat hangovers matter-of-factly, suggesting they were common enough to require standard remedies. Yet legal records rarely mention alcohol-related offenses. Was this a culture that embraced moderation, or one that simply accepted the occasional excess as Hathor's will? Kenny's morning traffic implies the latter. The gods gave us beer, he shrugs, measuring out another dose, and the sense to regret it. By midday, the worst cases have been dispatched, some to recover, others to relapse. The brewery returns to its rhythms, mashing, straining, fermenting, but with a slower, gentler pace, as if respecting the collective headache pulsing through the city. Even the Zeers seem to bubble more quietly. As you help grind herbs for the next batch of remedies, Kenny hums a festival tune under his breath, though mercifully softly. The cycle continues: celebration, consequence, cure. And through it all, the beer flows, the one constant in a world of fleeting joys and inevitable mornings after. The festival's aftermath lingers like the dregs in a beer cup, but life and brewing must go on. As the sun climbs toward its zenith, a new visitor darkens the brewery gate, a wiry, sun-baked man with a donkey laden not with grain or pottery, but with bulging sacks of a strange, knobby root. Kenny abandons his stirring spoon mid-stir. Hapu, you old desert fox, you actually found them. Hapu the trader grins, revealing teeth stained reddish-brown. Took 3 moons and a bribe to a Bedouin chieftain, but yes. He pats one sack, fresh Chinanet resin from the eastern hills, just like you begged for. Kenny tears open a sack and inhales deeply. The scent is intense, piney, medicinal, with a sharp citrus undertone. He tosses you a chunk. Chew it, gently. The resin is rock hard at first, but as you gnaw, it softens into a gummy mass, flooding your mouth with a flavor like lemon rind and incense. Your tongue tingles, your sinuses clear instantly. Hapu chuckles at your widened eyes. Good, yes? The nomads say it wards off evil spirits. I say it wards off bad beer. Chinanet resin, likely a type of frankincense or myrrh, was a prized import in ancient Egypt, used in perfumes, medicines, and, as Kenny demonstrates, brewing. Its antimicrobial properties helped preserve beer, while its distinctive flavor masked imperfections in rougher batches. Temple texts mention it being added to the beer of the gods, but its use in common brews was rare, until now. As Hapu and Kenny haggle, loudly, theatrically, you notice the trader slip a small leather pouch from his belt. "For your special clients," he murmurs. Inside are dried, crescent-shaped pods, jimmet seeds, but darker, more pungent than Kenny's usual stash. From beyond the Red Sea, Hapu whispers, "Twice as strong." Kenny palms the pouch without breaking his bargaining rhythm, seamlessly adding it to the transaction. The brewer's apothecary just got a dangerous upgrade. How extensive were ancient Egypt's trade networks for brewing ingredients? Residue analyses reveal traces of exotic spices and resins in elite brews, but their prevalence in everyday beer is unclear. Hapu's arrival suggests that ambitious brewers might have sought rare additives to distinguish their batches, an early form of craft brewing competition. But at what cost? A scrap of papyrus in Kenny's records lists ginanet at 5 copper deben per ounce, a week's wages for a laborer. Was this investment for quality, or just another way to impress wealthy patrons? Kenny's gleeful experimentation hints at both. As Hapu departs, his donkey's bells fading toward the spice quarter, Kenny immediately begins crushing a pinch of resin into a small batch of wort. For the scribal school's harvest feast, he declares, "Let's see if they notice the difference." You watch as the golden resin dissolves, its aroma transforming the humble beer into something almost sacred. The Zir bubbles a little faster, as if excited by its new passenger. Somewhere, a temple's incense burns, a noble's perfumed oil mingles with sweat, a physician's remedy soothes a fever, all echoes of this same resin, now bound for scribe's cup. The threads of trade, craft, and ritual weave tighter. Kenny dips a finger into the fermenting brew, tastes it, and grins. Oh, they'll notice. Section 18. The chinanet resin has barely begun its work in the scribal school's batch when an unexpected sound echoes through the brewery. Not the clatter of hooves or the bustle of workers, but the high, bright laughter of children. A group of them cluster at the gate, their bare feet dusty, their eyes wide with curiosity. At their head stand a girl no older than 10, her hair braided with blue beads, her arms crossed with authority. "Grandmother says to bring the weak beer," she announces, "for the weaning." Kenny doesn't laugh or shoo them away. He nods solemnly and reaches for a small amphora, one you recognize as containing a low-alcohol brew, barely fermented, thinned with extra water. For the little ones, he agrees, handing it over. The girl accepts it with both hands, as though it holds something precious. The children depart, their chatter fading into the afternoon heat. Kenny watches them go, his expression unreadable. "My mother weaned me on that," he says at last. "Half beer, half milk, a drop of honey. Tastes like nothing, but it's safer than Nile water." He stirs the chinanet-infused batch absently. First taste of the craft for most of us. Beer was a staple for all ages in ancient Egypt. Low alcohol, small beer, barely fermented wort diluted with water, was commonly given to children as a safe, nutritious drink. The boiling during brewing killed pathogens, and the residual yeast provided B vitamins. For infants, it might be mixed with breast milk or goat's milk, an early form of fortified weaning food. As you help clean the mashing basins, you notice tiny handprints pressed into the clay near the base, deliberate, not accidental. Kenny follows your gaze. "Apprentice marks," he explains. "Every brewer's child gets to press their hands into the soft clay once. For luck. He points to a pair of prints almost worn away by time. Mine. The tradition speaks volumes. Brewing wasn't just a trade. It was a lineage passed down like the yeast cultures in the Zirs. How young was too young for beer in ancient Egypt? Medical texts recommend weak beer for teething pain, but don't specify ages. Skeletal evidence shows some children with enamel damage potentially linked to early alcohol exposure. Was this widespread or limited to certain classes? Kinney's careful dilution suggests practical awareness of moderation, but the tiny handprints hint at a culture where beer was simply part of life, from first sip to last. The contrast is striking. In one corner, the Chinanette-infused luxury brew for scribes. In another, the thin, wholesome drink for children. Beer as status symbol, as medicine, as daily bread, all coexisting in the same courtyard. As dusk falls, you glimpse the girl with the blue beads again, now in the workers' quarter, carefully pouring the weak beer into a clay cup for a toddler. The child drinks greedily, milk-white droplets clinging to their chin. Somewhere, a scribe sips resin-spiced ale and composes poetry. Somewhere, a quarryman gulps his ration and wipes his brow. The beer flows to all who need it, in the form they require. Kenny's voice startles you from your thoughts. Tomorrow, we start a new batch, he says, for the temple's coming-of-age rites. He smirks. That one we don't dilute. The moon hangs heavy over the brewery when the scratching begins. Not the usual scuttling of rats, but a deliberate, rhythmic sound from the courtyard's darkest corner. Kenny, who should be asleep, is instead crouched beside the oldest Zir, its surface blackened by countless fires. In his hand, a flint knife, its tip etching careful lines into the clay. You approach silently. The emerging shapes resolve into hieroglyphs, not the formal script of temple walls, but the quick, personal shorthand of brewers, a beer jug, a wave, a sun disk. Beneath them, a crude but cheerful stick figure raising a cup. Kenny senses your presence, but doesn't pause. Every Zir gets its story, he murmurs. This one's seen 30 floods. Fermented beer for 2 pharaohs' coronations, and one very hungover high priest. He carves a tiny priestly wig onto the figure, lopsided. Time it told its tales. The scratching continues, each stroke a memory. A barley sheaf for a record harvest. A crooked line for the year the Nile barely rose. A cluster of dots that might be stars, or perhaps the freckles on a long-gone apprentice's face. While formal records were kept on papyrus, ancient artisans often left informal marks on their tools and vessels. Potters signed their work, masons doodled in quarry walls, and brewers, it seems, annotated their Zirs. These graffiti provide intimate glimpses into individual lives that official histories ignore. As Kenny works, you notice older markings beneath the fresh ones, layer upon layer of symbols, some so worn they're barely visible. One patch shows a careful tally of vertical strokes grouped in 5s. My grandfather's batch counts, Kenny explains. The man could recite every brew he ever made by season, flood level, and grain quality. He traces the faintest marks of all, childish handprints, like those near the mashing basin, but miniature. His daughter's hands. My aunt died in childbirth. The Zir isn't just a tool. It's a family chronicle, written in clay instead of ink. How common were these personal vessel inscriptions? Archaeologists find them, but their fragility means most are lost. Were they whimsy or ritual? Kenny's actions suggest both. The tally marks are practical. the handprints sacred, the doodles pure humanity. The line between record and memorial blurs. When this zir finally cracks, will its stories die with it, or live on in the brewer's next vessel? The etching finished, Kenny rubs a dab of beer into the fresh marks, staining them darker. There, he says, satisfied. Now the ghosts will remember. You peer closer. Among the symbols, almost hidden, is a tiny stick figure with your distinctive posture. Hands on hips, head slightly tilted. Your likeness, immortalized in clay. Kenny pretends not to notice your surprise. For luck, he grunts, standing. Now go sleep. Dawn comes early. The zir stands silent, its new scars gleaming faintly in the moonlight. Tomorrow, it will hold another batch, another transformation. But tonight, it holds something rarer. The quiet, stubborn insistence that ordinary lives and ordinary labor are worth remembering. The brewery stirs before dawn, as always. But today's rhythm feels different. Lighter, as if the air itself hums with anticipation. Kenny moves through his tasks with unusual briskness, his usual grumbling replaced by occasional snatches of song. Even the overseer in Tef's morning inspection is met with a cheerful nod rather than the customary resigned sigh. The reason becomes clear as the sun climbs. Today is settlement day. By mid-morning, the courtyard fills with workers, not just the usual brewers and haulers, but representatives from every guild. Quarrymen with limestone dust still clinging to their brows. Potters with clay-caked fingernails, weavers trailing wisps of flax thread. They line up before a row of amphorae, each marked with different symbols. Kenny takes his place beside them, a scribe at his elbow with a wax tablet. Teddy, son of Katie, calls the scribe. A burly stonecutter steps forward. 30 days' labor at the northern quarry. Standard ration rate. Kenny fills a large jug from the amphora marked with a chisel symbol. A hearty, high-alcohol brew favored by manual laborers. Teddy accepts it with a grin, hefts it to test the weight, and departs with a satisfied nod. Next comes a delicate-fingered woman in ink-stained linen. IRY, scribe of the granary records. 20 days. Her amphora is smaller but finer. Its contents, a smoother, date-sweetened beer, poured with ceremonial care. She sips immediately, smacks her lips, and declares, better than last month's. My compliments. Beer wasn't just a casual perk, it was formal currency. The Rhine mathematical papyrus, circa 1550 BCE, includes problems calculating fair beer rations based on work type and duration. Standard rates range from 2 liters for unskilled laborers to 5+ liters for foremen, with quality varying by rank. This wasn't just payment, it was a calibrated system of reward and motivation. As the line progresses, you notice Kenny occasionally deviate from the standard measures. A particularly gaunt quarryman receives an extra splash with a muttered for your cough. A young apprentice gets a thimble-sized taste of the scribal brew for curiosity's sake. And when the overseer in Tef steps up for his official allotment, Kenny, with perfect innocence, pours from a special jar marked with a tiny, discreet lotus. In Tef's eyes narrow in recognition, but he accepts it without comment. The unspoken rules of settlement day allow for flexibility. How strictly were these rations really enforced? Ostraca, pottery shard notes, reveal worker complaints about short measures or sour batches, suggesting variability. But tomb paintings depict meticulous measuring, implying standardization. Kenny's subtle adjustments hint at a dual system. Official rates for records, human discretion in practice. The scribe's tablet might say equal rations for equal work, but the brewer's hand knows who labored hardest, who ailed quietly, who shared their bread during lean times. By afternoon, the courtyard empties, the workers disperse to enjoy their wages. Kinney surveys the remaining amphorae, some nearly empty, others barely touched. The acrobats always take theirs late, he explains, patting one full jar. After practice, you help tidy up, collecting stray cups and spill drops. The air smells of yeast and satisfaction. This is the cycle's culmination. Grain to beer, beer to labor, labor back to grain. Not just commerce, but covenant. A promise etched in foam rather than stone. As the shadows lengthen, a final figure appears at the gate. Merritt the physician, her ibis-headed staff tapping. Without a word, Kinney fills 2 cups from the scribal amphora and hands one to her, one to you. To the work, Merritt intones. To the workers, Kinney corrects. You drink. The beer is cool, complex, perfect. Around you, the brewery rests. Empty but not idle. Its ears already dreaming of the next batch, the next harvest, the next turn of the eternal wheel. The stars are bright now, the last embers of the fire pit fading to ash. The brewery sleeps, the Zeers silent, the tools stacked, the courtyard swept clean. Even Kinney has retired. His snores a distant rumble like a contented Zeer's last bubbles. You linger in the doorway, the night air soft on your skin. Somewhere in the city, a stonecutter shares his ration with laughing children. A scribe sips thoughtfully, pen hovering over a half-finished poem. A midwife rubs medicinal beer on a newborn's gums. The beer flows on, as it always has, as it always will, through festivals and famines, coronations and quiet nights. The Nile whispers in the distance. The reeds stir. And if you listen very, very closely, you might hear it. The faintest echo of a Zeer's breath, the sigh of yeast settling, the slow, sweet song of transformation that began when the first grain met the first fire. Close your eyes. Let the darkness take you. The beer will keep.